Now it's time to take things one step further with state. In the last video, we reversed the data flow. In this one, we're going to reverse the data flow, but we're also going to pass data upstream. So neither of these two guys took arguments. We're going to create a third one that does. It is going to take the option text of the new option to add. Now that is going to come from the component way down at the bottom. We have our add option component. This is where our form lives. Not only do we want to call the parent method, we want to pass data up. So let's go ahead and kick things off up in the parent by defining the method. We're going to call this one handle add option. And I am going to set this up to take a single argument. It is the individual option. I'm also going to go ahead and open and close those curly braces, and we'll worry about actually manipulating the state in just a second. Let's just wire things up using console.log to test our work. Right here, I'm just going to dump the option text to the screen every single time this method gets called. If we can get to that part, great, then we'll worry about actually using this .set state. Now, to pass this down, we will first bind it up above this dot handle add option. We're going to set it equal to itself, bound to the correct component. Then we're going to go ahead and actually pass it down. We're going to pass it down to add option, which lives right here. I'm going to go ahead and move this onto its own line, setting up that prop. We're going to call it the same as the method name, handle add option, and we'll set it equal to none other than this dot handle add option. So now that that component has access to the method via this prop, let's go ahead and actually call it way down here. Down below, instead of alerting it, we are going to call this .props. The prop we just added was handle add option. This time we're not just going to call it, we are going to actually pass data in option. Now you might be asking yourself, why are we still keeping this method around? For the other components like options and up here action, we actually removed the method completely and we just reference the actual prop in on click here and here. Down below though, we're not doing that. The reason why is that we actually do want to do a few things in here. We still want to get things off of the form. I want to prevent the default form submission, and this is behavior best left to add option itself. It wouldn't really make sense for this sort of behavior to live up in the parent. So we're going to go ahead and keep this method in place. This will still be the correct onSubmit handler for this form. Now for the very first time, we are using this inside of handle add option. So I am going to set up the constructor function real quick. Right here, we're going to get those props. We're going to pass them up to super. And we're going to bind that method. This dot handle add option equals this dot handle add option bound correctly. So we have two handle add option methods now. We have one built into the component that's in charge of just doing something when the form gets submitted, and we have one passed down from the parent. That is the one that actually is going to get things manipulated in terms of that state. Now currently it doesn't manipulate the state. Let's go ahead and save our work and make sure we're at least seeing that console message we set up. I'm going to type something in, hit enter, and right here we do see it show up. The same is going to be true if I type in anything else. We're going to see that get registered correctly. So that data is getting extracted right here from the form. It's getting trimmed. If it exists, we're passing it up to the parent, and the parent, that is where the log actually exists. So now that we're able to log the data in the parent, let's go ahead and actually add it to the options array. I'm going to remove the console.log call and replace it with a this.setState call, and we can pass in our updater function. Now, do we need access to the previous state to compute the new one? You betcha. We want to make sure to keep all of the existing options around. So I will name that prev state. Now, down below, we can go ahead and actually return our object that has the updates. We want to update the only piece of state we have, which is options. The real question is, how do we compute the new array? Now, there are a few ways we could do this. We could go ahead and do something like prev state dot options dot push. We could push on the option, and then we could go ahead and just take this and add it on right here. But we're actually directly manipulating the this.state object, which is something that we do not want to do. We never want to manipulate the state or the previous state here. Instead, we want to go ahead and just compute the new one. So instead of using push, we're going to use the array concat method. The array concat method is going to allow us to merge the values from this array with something new without affecting this array. So it's not going to change that stuff. To do that, we're going to use concat right here. Now we can explore concat before we use it. As always, I recommend using MDN, the Mozilla Developer Network. If you Google MDN concat, it's going to get you over to the right place. We're looking for the array method that is sitting right here. There's also one for strings, but we're going to be using the array one. And as we can see, we can take an array. We can call concat on it. In this case, we're calling concat on the array1 variable. We can then go ahead and pass in something else we want to add on, and we get a brand new array. And we actually did this without manipulating either of these guys. And that's exactly the sort of technique we're looking for. So let's go ahead and get that done. Right here, we're going to access previous state dot options. Then we're going to go ahead and call the concat method. In here, we're going to go ahead and pass in the new array we want to merge it with. And this is just going to be a new array with a single item option. Now that we have this in place, we should be able to actually add options from the user interface. I'm going to go ahead and type in something. This is something new. Hit enter, and it is indeed showing up right here, which is a great first step. Now, when we use concat, we can pass in an array, and it is going to merge those two arrays, but we can also pass in a non-array value, in which case it's just going to add it on. So this has the exact same effect as what we had previously. If I save app.js, once again, we can add something new onto the list, test, it shows up, perfect. If we remove all of the items, we can see the picker goes away. So now that we have the ability to actually add options via the UI, let's go ahead and change the default state. Instead of having 3 items by default, we're going to start off with an empty array. That's going to ensure that there is no dummy data in the application. And there we have it. The app renders with an empty list. Now that we have this in place, I want to wrap up this video by adding a little bit of validation into handle add option. Currently, we blindly take in the option and add it on. What we're going to do instead is add a little bit of conditional logic. We're going to first check if there's actually just an empty string getting passed in. To do that, we're going to add an if statement. We're going to check if option. Now this would currently run if there is a string with at least one character inside of it. It would not run if it was an empty string. So we're just going to flip it. Now this is only going to run if there is an empty string. And in that case, we're going to return a string, and this is going to be our error message. So we can say something like enter valid value to add item. And this is actually going to get communicated via return back down to the add option component. We'll take a look at that in just a moment. For now, let's go ahead and continue on. We're going to add an else if. And in here, we're going to check if the option already exists in the array. So we're going to go ahead and access this .state.options, and we're going to get the index of option. Now, index of is going to return the 0-based index, so 0 if it's the first item, 1 if it's the second item, or -1 if it doesn't exist at all. So what we're going to say is if this is greater than -1, we know that means we found a match, and that's a problem because that means it's already in the array. So we're going to go ahead and return a message for that case as well. We can stick with something like this item, let's say this option, already exists. There we have it. So those are our two cases. If neither of those pass, we can just toss in our else. Inside of else, we can put that code. But if you'll notice, we actually already have 2 returns, which means that if either of these cases fire, it's actually just going to stop the function anyways. So this is perfectly valid. This is equivalent to an else clause. Now, how does this actually affect the calling of handle add option? Well, it means that if things went well, we're going to get undefined back since we don't explicitly return anything. The only place we explicitly return anything is if something went wrong. So we can go ahead and actually use this information down below to extract the error. Right here, inside of our handle add option method, we're going to go ahead and tweak how we set things up. No longer do we need a conditional right here that is handled up above. So we can take this code, I can cut it out, and I can paste it up above. And now we actually are going to get a return value back, a potential error message. So I'm going to create a const error, setting it equal to whatever comes back. If nothing comes back, great. Everything worked well. If an error does come back, what we're going to do is figure out how we can show that to the screen. If you guessed we were about to introduce component state down here, you are correct. So not only are we going to have component state for Indecision app, we're also going to have state down below. Because the error message is specific to this form, it's really the only place it needs to live. We're going to go ahead and get that done by setting up a default value. This dot state can get set equal to our state object. In this case, there is one thing we want to track. It's the error message, and I'm just going to call this one error. And we're going to set it equal to undefined by default. So by default, there will be no error. The user hasn't submitted the form, and we won't actually render a message. Now, when they do submit the form with an error, we want to go ahead and update the error state using this dot set state. Right here, we're going to pass in our updater function. Do we need access to the previous state? No, we just need to use this value. So we're going to return our object. On here, we are going to set error equal to the error value up above. Now in ES6, we have the object shorthand. So if we have a property whose value comes from a variable with the exact same name, we can actually just leave it off like this. That is completely valid. If we had other properties like name set equal to Andrew, those would look exactly the same. So I just want to give you a quick idea of what that would look like right here. So in this case, this object is identical to this object. It's just a shorthand syntax. So we're going to go ahead and remove all of the dummy properties. I just wanted to show you what it would look like if we had multiple properties, and we're just going to set error equal to error right here. And since this one is so simple, it's actually common to see it on one line like this. Awesome. So we're correctly setting the error. If the error comes back as undefined, we are once again wiping it. If it comes back as a string, we're setting it. Either way, we can go ahead and actually render an error down below. And I'm going to go ahead and put this just above our form. So we can set up right here our JavaScript expression. I'm going to check if this .state.error is truthy or falsy. Undefined is falsy. So I can use the logical AND operator to conditionally render a paragraph when the error is actually set. Here we're going to have our paragraph, and the text is going to come from the error itself. So another JavaScript expression in this little bit of JSX. This .state.error. Excellent. Let's go ahead and save app.js and see what happens over here. I'm going to submit the form with no value. We can see enter valid value to add item. Our error message is correctly showing up. If I type in test, the test item gets added, the error goes away. Now, if I try to add test again, we're going to see the other message shows up. This option already exists. So if we do want to add an option, we have to make it unique, and it has to have some sort of text value. I'm going to go ahead and type test123. That is unique, so it shows up and the error goes away. So there we have it. We can add component state to as many of our components as we need to, and we can also use function props to communicate in both directions. That's going to allow a child like add option to pass some data up to a parent like the Indecision app. With this in place, we now have all of the behavior from JSX Indecision plus a bunch more. Not only are we getting data into an array, we're now getting data into an array that lives on the component as component state, and we set up validation for our form. We don't just blindly take information in anymore. We can do a little bit of validation, and we can get those error messages hiding and showing as appropriate. Now that we have this in place, we are done with this section. We've taken a nice look at the core features of React components. In the next section, you're going to learn about a brand new way to create React components. We're going to talk about what it is and when you want to use it. I'm real excited to get to that, so stay tuned in the next section where you're going to learn about stateless functional components.